Exactly 78 years ago today, Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy in what is now known as D-Day. Today, I have the distinct honor and privilege of speaking to somebody who was there, somebody who fought and defended our freedom in Canada. I'm Candace Malcolm, and welcome to a very special edition of The Candace Malcolm Show. Hi everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. So today, June 6th, is D-Day, also known as the Day of Courage. On June 6th, 1944, after months of planning, the Allied forces launched what was called Operation Overlord, the invasion of Western Europe, which had suffered under Nazi occupation for 4 years. At the time, the Allied forces were fighting across Italy, but with one foul swoop, the Allied armies created a new Western Front against Hitler's forces, designed to ease pressure from the Eastern Front and weaken the Nazi war efforts. Operation Overlord, which was launched on D-Day, June 6th, was a coordinated attack against the Nazis along the beaches of Normandy, a 100-kilometer stretch of the French coastline across the English Canal from Great Britain. At the time, it was the largest seaborne invasion in military history. Allied infantry and armored divisions from Canada, the US, and Great Britain began landing on the coast of France at 6:30 a.m. The Normandy coast was divided into 5 sectors: Utah and Omaha, where the Americans landed, Gold and Sword, where the British landed, and Juno, where our Canadian troops launched and were landed. As you might imagine, the young men who landed there were under heavy fire from gun emplacements overlooking the beaches, and the shore was mined and covered with obstacles such as wooden stakes, metal tripods, and barbed wires, making the work of the beach clearing teams difficult and dangerous. Canada suffered some 961 casualties on that one morning while disembarking at Juno Beach. The Normandy landings marked an unprecedented war effort, unmatched at the time. There were nearly 5,000 landing and assault craft vessels carrying approximately 160,000 troops who crossed the English Channel on D-Day, with 875,000 men disembarking by the end of June, including 14,000 Canadians. Allied casualties on the first day alone were 10,000, with 4,414 confirmed dead. Now, of course, this turned out to be a major turning point in the war, and by the end of August 1944, the Allies had reached the Seine River, Paris was liberated, and the Germans began retreating and were removed from northwest France, effectively concluding the Battle of Normandy. The Allied forces then prepared to enter Germany, where they would meet up with Soviet troops entering from the east. Again, the Normandy invasion began to turn the tide against the Nazis, a significant psychological blow. It prevented Hitler from sending troops from France to build up his Eastern Front against the advancing Soviets. The following spring, on May 8th, 1945, the Allied forces accepted the unconditional surrender of Nazi Germany, and the efforts of the Canadians and the Allied forces on the beaches of Normandy were a clear turning point in the war and in the effort against fascism in Italy. Now today, for this very special edition of the Candace Malcolm Show, I'm just so delighted to be joined by someone who was there, someone who fought and nearly died, someone who saw it all with their own eyes to defend Canada. I'm speaking with Mr. Jim Parks. He is a true Canadian hero. Mr. Parks enlisted in the Canadian military at the age of 10. He joined the cadets, and then at the age of 16, 2 years before he was eligible to enlist, Parks joined the Royal Winnipeg Rifles. After enlisting, Mr. Parks began his training first in Canada and then in the UK, which would last more than 2 years. Jim had 5 brothers who served in the Second World War, and his father and his uncle both served in the First World War. So there he was on June 6, 1944, exactly 78 years ago today. He was part of the very first wave of Canadian soldiers to land on Juno Beach in Normandy, France, and heroically beat the Germans. Mr. Parks and his fellow soldiers would eventually push the Germans town by town over the months with intense fighting that would result in significant Canadian casualties. By the war's end, Mr. Parks would find himself in Germany, having successfully liberated the Netherlands and pushing the Nazis into total defeat. After the war, Jim and other soldiers spent time in the Netherlands and England before heading back home to Canada. He would continue to serve his country and his community after the war, first as a fireman in Winnipeg, and then he worked in various roles for the federal government in administrative and managerial positions. Jim retired from the military after 15 years in the reserves, and he made his way up to the rank of major. He now asks people to commit good deeds in support of the memory of the men who served alongside him. He wants people to participate in and virtual walks to raise money for veterans' causes and organizations like the Juno Beach Center. Jim now lives in Mount Albert, Ontario, with his wife Genevieve. There are very few Canadians who deserve the recognition and honor as a true Canadian hero, more so than Mr. Jim Parks, my guest today. We are extremely lucky to have him on the show. So, Mr. Parks, thank you so much for joining our podcast. Thank you for being with us today. How are you doing?
Pretty good.
Great. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what your experiences were like 78 years ago on D-Day when you were part of the invasion storming the beaches of Normandy?
Well, that was we had a lot of preparation for that for the D-Day itself, and I recall the leading up to that we were put on boats at Portsmouth, which is the southern part of England. That's where and I was in a landing craft tank, which is a bigger one, because I was with the mortar platoon, and we had 2 mortar carriers, which and we were lined up behind 2 armored bulldozers on the landing craft tank, and we were supposed to go into the beach 2 minutes ahead of the infantry assault boats, because the armored bulldozers had big ropes on them with hooks, and when they could come off the landing craft, they were to pull off all the obstacles in the water, which would allow the landing craft to come in. Wouldn't be hitting the obstacles. However, that's the way it was. We're supposed to be 2 minutes ahead of them, but the way things worked out, we all got mixed up, and we were mixed up with the landing craft coming in, and the bulldozers. They were a little late pulling those obstacles over the water, but when they went off the landing craft, the landing craft got fouled up, and our carriers, when we went off the landing craft, the water was too deep, and we sank. The water was about 8 feet deep, and there's about 6 to 8 feet when you figure out the waves, and when you get close to the shore, it's rougher, and so we end up, instead of coming on the shore with 2 mortar carriers, we end up swimming in instead. The mortar carriers were under the water. So I ended up on the beach, and the first thing I got to the beach, I plopped beside this. I knew this Corporal Scape. He'd been mortally wounded, so I picked up the Sten gun from him, because I lost all my equipment going in, and then I headed for the sand dunes and waited for the rest of our crew to come in. It took a little while because there's a lot of noise and a lot of firing going on, and although the machine gun fire being put down, there's a lot of mortar bombs still landing from the enemy had mortars further inland, and they were popping the bombs onto the beach. So we had to take cover quite a bit. Otherwise, we were kind of lucky too, because the sand would absorb quite a bit of the shock of the bombs landing and take up a bit of the shrapnel, but it was still pretty dangerous. So we got to the sand dune itself, and the rest of the platoon come in. They were okay because they got further in, and they still had their carriers. We lost ours, so we scooted in past about. Once you cross past the sand dunes, it's a little bit quieter, because the enemy had their positions a little bit further inland to take care of the beach. The beach party itself were overwhelmed pretty quickly. When I say beach party, the beach party of the enemy, and what they had a little bit further back. So the first part we got in was a little bit quieter. When I say quieter, there was a little less machine gun fire and mortar fire, and we made our way. The first day was a little bit quieter because of the snipers, except for snipers. And we got to a village called Putot, Putot, Putot en Besson, and that was a small village. So we got in around there, and we were dug in, and we prepared for the counterattack. And we had our own troops are a little slow getting in behind us. We had reinforcements coming in, but they got held up. The weather was a little bit bad, and the beach was a bit rough, but they finally got in. And we were there for the first night. It was fairly quiet except for snipers. On the 8th of June, the enemy launched a counterattack. It was the 12th SS Panzer Division. Panzers are tanks, so they had their tanks coming in, and it was a little bit rough around Puteaux because they were overrun, and we were mixed up with the enemy. You go around one corner, you spot them, and they seem to be popping up everywhere because the wheat field was about 4 feet deep. This is June, and the grain was a bit higher, so they were infiltrating through the wheat field. So it was a little bit rough there for the 7th and 8th. The 8th is when the big counterattack came in, and we got overrun by the SS. Like I said, the tanks and the infantry, and it was pretty rough going there for a bit, and until we launched a counterattack by the Canadian, Scottish, and other units, and helped push them back. So we had to reestablish ourselves around the village of Puteaux. Got pretty rough that the first day or two. So we lost a lot of people on the beach. I think we lost over close to 150 on the beach, killed and wounded. And then we got a few reinforcements in that night, and we didn't get a chance to spread them out. So they ended up digging in. We were digging in a trench, and they come around and they said, "Make room for somebody else." So we had instead of being only 2 in a trench, we had 3 in a trench. So what we did is we got out of the trench and helped them dig their own hole, because it's a little too crowded when you get 3 in a trench. It's only made for 2. So it was pretty rough because a lot of shell fire coming in, and there's a lot of machine gun fire. So we were hoping that we get some tanks coming in, but the tanks did come in, but we not near us. They're in the area surrounding us, but not near us. That was our own tanks. But the enemy had their tanks. They had the Tigers, and they had the Mark IVs. So it was pretty rough. Sometimes you didn't know around the corner whether your own people were there or whether the Jerry's were there. So you had to be careful where you go around. So we were told to dig in and prepare for the major counterattack, which we did. And by that time, we had more troops coming in, which helped out. And we were relieved because they went forward of us, and then that meant we were reserved. After the first day and a half, we were at the front, and then we become a reserve, which is about 100 yards, 200 yards behind them. So prepared to counterattack them if they broke through. That's how it was pretty rough. The first 2 days.
Well, Mr. Parks, it's incredible your recollection and your memory of this event that happened over 75 years ago. Can you tell the viewers, how old were you at the time?
I was 19 at the time. Yeah, just because I joined when I was 15. A lot of the time you must remember that was just after the Depression years, and there's a lot of people out of work and so on and so forth. And so it was, as soon as the war broke out, all the young kids were running down to the recruiting office saying, "I'm 18, you're only 15 or 16, but they're saying 18, and they didn't bother checking. They were just glad to have you." So you look around, you see pictures of what we look like. You didn't fool anybody, because you look 15 and 16, and you were supposed to be 18 and 19. But when you look at it, a lot of the young soldiers at the time were underage in the initial part of the war. That was the thing to do to join up, and the parents didn't mind, because one less mouth to feed, I guess, because that was Depression years. It was hard to find jobs, and hard to you were at school, but it was a little rough at school because you didn't have that much at school, you bare necessities and so on. But we got along. Nobody starved.
That's great. Well, your daughter sent me your bio, Mr. Parks, and it seems like D-Day was your very first taste of the war. It was your first day in battle, and everything up until then was more training. So what was that like for your very first glimpse of active battle, being such a monumental moment and a turning point in the war like that. Did you realize the scope and the importance of D-Day at the time?
Well, actually, and I remember there was one sergeant of us. He was sort of a gung ho guy, and he after going into the beach, he was he was saying, this is it. We're gonna go get him. We're gonna go get him. We're gonna go get him. And the rest of us sitting, saying, wondering what the heck's gonna go on. Because once they dropped that ramp at the front, you had to dash out. You had to move out with your mortar carriers and so on. But like I say, our boat was hit, so we ended up swimming in. So once we got to the beach, we got picked up that Sten gun off Corporal Scaife, who'd been wounded, badly wounded. He died. He died of his wounds. And I got to the sand dune, and a few minutes later, our platoon commander, they come in with their mortar carriers, and we just jumped on the back of their carriers to be with them, because we lost everything going in. So we lost our carriers, we lost everything, we all had to swim in. So it was a little bit rougher. So for the next while, we were extra people on those carriers, and they said we would get we'd get our new equipment within a matter of a couple of days, but we never got it for about 3 weeks. Instead of getting a carrier, they give us a 1,500 weight truck, which wasn't very good to carry your mortars with, but it was better than nothing.
And so what happened next? So you made it past Juno Beach and up into the inlands in Normandy. How long did you stay in Europe, and what was your next role after that?
Well, you actually got to Plateau. We end up in a place called Carpiquet, which is an airport. It was an airport with the Germans had used it prior to the invasion. They used that as a staging point. They'd pop in there on the way to bomb England. They stop in and get gas and so on, and they'd fly over to England. And so we got past that part. We got into a place called Caen, the city of Caen. But that wasn't easy because we spent about a few weeks before we got into Caen. In fact, the Germans had put up a pretty good defensive perimeter, and they had all kinds of they had the SS tanks, and they had the guns, and they had very well equipped, and they had to mount a major offensive to get past Caen. I think it took about 8 or 9 weeks before we got out of Caen. Caen was only about 12 miles inland from the beach, right? But in the meantime, all of Normandy was just getting stacked up with all kinds of army equipment and guns and tanks and everything else, and set for the major offensive. And they staged 2 or 3 major offensives before they broke down the German defensive line. And then we got past Caen up to a place called Falaise, and the Falaise was the breaking point. And they finally, the Germans after Falaise, they sort of on the run. They made their way back to the big river they call the Rhine. Not the Rhine, but I forgot what river it's called, the Rhone. It was quite a deal. But that first 8 to 9 weeks was rough going. Everybody had a lot of casualties. We had a lot of equipment was lost and so on. They put up a pretty brave front there. They had a lot of equipment. But what wore them down was our Air Force. The Air Force come over and they did a lot of bombing. And the fighter planes had rockets, and they did a lot of rocket firing. So it's amazing that they held out so long with all that continuing firing that they had against them. They couldn't move at all. In fact, one of their generals was driving back in his car, and a fighter plane come over, and by firing it, the car took evasive action, ended up in a ditch, and one of the major generals was badly hurt, and that you take some of their major generals away from an army, you have nobody to lead them, so the leaders weren't as good. So that helped us quite a bit. That's looking back at what they said later. Be able to read up why it made such a difference.
So what kept you going then, Mr. Parks, and what motivated you to continue the fight during some of the darkest days of those battles?
Well, you're working as a group, and you everybody works as a team, and you look to the other guy, and he looks to you, and as long as he keeps going, you're going to keep going. Like I say, this one guy that we had, Tommy Plum, was quite a character. He was always gung ho, and he was one of our sergeants, and Jimmy Stewart, another good sergeant. We have pretty good NCOs, and they provide a good incentive. And we were lucky because we had the leaders they picked prior to going in to prove that they were good leaders when we hit the battle, because it all turned out pretty good. And we lost quite a few the first few weeks, killed and wounded. So we had to have a good backup. So that meant the junior NCOs would move over and take over the senior NCO's job when they got wounded or killed in action. We lost quite a few that first while, because when I go over there to visit cemeteries, most of the people I know are buried in Normandy. When you go further back to Groesbeek in Germany, I don't know as many, but most of the people I do know, if I go by the graves in Normandy itself, I recognize more people because they were with us quite a few years in Canada and in England. We lost quite a few in that first few weeks in Normandy.
What was life like for you after you returned from the war, and what was it like to come back to Canada after all this?
When you come back to Canada, I look back afterwards, and I call that the year of the lost souls, because you come back, you've been so used to being active and being involved in so much, and here you are, you're coming into civilian life, and everything's quieter, and it's pretty hard to get adjusted. And some people it's easy to get adjusted, but if you're at the front and being in action all the time, it was a little different from somebody that being, say, stationed in Canada and being in a base, they could adjust easier. Where a person being in Europe, being in action, being at the front, or being, say, the Air Force too, being in fighting in the aircraft and so on, it'd be kind of hard for all those type of people to readjust to the momentum was so different. Like I said, I call it the year of the lost souls, the year of trying to get readjusted to life. It was kind of difficult. And I remember the first year you'd go down in Winnipeg. That Winnipeg at that time, if you go to a bar, it was only for men only, and no ladies were allowed. And the place was just jammed full of ex-servicemen, drinking one glass of beer after another and refighting the battles. A lot of them were lies, a lot of them were good stories too, but it was quite a bit of adjusting to do. And they had all kinds of systems set up, but it wasn't that easy. It took me a while to get. They had all these programs set up, but I couldn't take advantage of them at the time because I wasn't ready to be. I ended up about 4 years later, decided to start to do things on my own, taking night courses and so on and so forth. And I didn't realize at the time because I had a disability from the war, I was eligible to get courses free, but I was paying for the courses on my own 4 years later. If you did your first discharge, you're allowed two years to take advantage of any courses. It was free of charge. But after 2 years, you had to pay for it. That's how they worked it.
Interesting. And so I see that you're involved with something called the Memory Project. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is and what your role has been with this project?
Well, you're on call. Like, so people would like to, like schools or organizations, they wanted the people to come forward and to describe their experiences in World War II. And so I with a friend of mine, we put a PowerPoint together after a while, and he did a very good job of putting up some shots of World War II and I incorporated my own discussions with it. And I'd go to a school or organizations, and I'd play this, and I was able to talk with it. And I had this, how you have this little light, you point at the screen and so on, and you highlight the messages, and you're able to describe the action a lot better than just pulling out from the memory. This is incite your memory. My memory got pretty good after a while because you got to recollect quite a few things. You wouldn't bring in all the blood and guts. You just bring in the generalizations, and you describe all the actions and whatever you could do.
And so, what is the message that you have when you speak to schools, you speak to students, you speak to young Canadians? What is it that you think is important that they know about what you lived through, what the Second World War was fought for, and what Canada means to you?
Well, what it means is that just cherish what they have, look around what they've got. They're able to walk, they're able to get a job where they want, they're able to travel where they want, they can do what they want each day, get up, they take what job they want, but they have the freedom of choice. It's a matter of preparing themselves for that choice, and they take advantage of that. Don't take it for granted. Just realize what you have, and utilize every aspect you can of your energy and your education to do the best you can to make a living. Because what you got your whole life ahead of you, you got to prepare for it. You got to make sure you get a good foundation, and you got to look ahead. Prepare yourself for not only the next year, but look ahead a bit and say, well, how am I preparing today so I'm better off next year and the year after? Like if you're looking forward to when you first get started, you get married, or you want to get a house, how you have to plan ahead of time how you're going to plan to get that, where you're going to go. And in the meantime, you've got your own job. You're preparing yourself in your own job, and you're improving yourself in your education and work habits, so you get ahead in your job and earn more money. Because without earning the money, you're not going to go anywhere. You've got to get a good foundation of work habits and education.
Well, that's such a wonderful message, Mr. Parks. We really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for everything you've done for Canada. It's really incredible to get to talk to you, knowing the sacrifices that you made, where you were, the importance of your role in shaping the country that we now enjoy and that we're so privileged to live in. So thank you so much for joining the podcast. God bless you. And thank you again for everything.
Well, thank you very much. It's been nice talking to you.
All right. Have a great day. Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah, bye.
It's an incredible story, and we appreciate Mr. Parks' time. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Candace Malcolm. This has been a very special edition of The Candace Malcolm Show.